This is the second part of the video on position of Indian president. This video is also based on Spectrum's Indian polity. And in this video, we will discuss on veto power of the President of India, concept and classification of veto, vetoes exercisable by the Indian President, D.D. Basu's take on this, veto power vis-a-vis constitutional amendment bills. Concept and classification of veto. Veto is a Latin word that connotes forbid. In constitutional parley, it is an important device entrusted with the chief executive to prevent hasty and ill-considered action by the legislature. It is vested with the president or the monarch in presidential and parliamentary forms of government. Most chief executives possess the power of veto by which they refuse to assent to legislation. From the standpoint of effect on the legislation, executive vetoes have been classified as follows. Number 1, absolute veto. According to absolute veto, if the chief executive refuses assent to any bill, it cannot become law, notwithstanding any veto of the parliament. The English crown possessed this type of veto before the evolution of the cabinet system in England, that is before 1707. Number second is qualified veto. A veto is qualified when it can be overridden by an extraordinary majority of the legislature, and the bill can then be enacted as law with such majority. However, if the parliament fails to garner such extraordinary majority, say two-thirds of, as in the case of the American system, the veto stands and the bill fails to become law. Thus, this type of veto serves as a means available to the executive to point out the defects in the legislation and to obtain a reconsideration by the legislature. The US president possesses this type of veto. Number 3, suspensive veto. When an executive veto is bypassed by an ordinary or simple majority by the legislature, it is termed as suspensive veto. Typical of the French presidential type, the purpose of this type of veto is similar to that of a qualified veto. The Indian president also possesses this type of veto. Fourth one is pocket veto. On presentation of a bill for assent, if the executive, instead of either giving assent or sending it for reconsideration, keeps the bill pending indefinitely or until the expiry of the minimum time limit, if one is prescribed, the executive exercises what is known as pocket veto. It qualifies as a type of veto in the sense that if in the meantime the legislature is adjourned or dissolved, the bill fails to become a law. The American and the Indian constitutions entrust their presidents with this type of veto too. After the classification of veto, now let's see vetoes exercisable by the Indian president. The veto power in India is vested with the president, the provision for which is stated in Article 111. When a bill has been passed by the Houses of Parliament, it shall be presented to the President, and the President shall declare either that he assents to the bill or that he withholds assent for the bill. The Indian President possesses a combination of absolute, suspensive, and pocket vetoes. Absolute veto of the Indian President is a legacy of the Government of India Act 1935. However, the post-independence constitution allows the President to use this type of veto only in two circumstances. Number one, in the case of a private member's bill, that is, a bill introduced by a member of parliament who is not a minister. And number two, in the case of a government bill, if after the passage or and before the assent by the president, the Council of Ministers resigns and the next cabinet advises the president to use this veto to reject the bill altogether. Since absolute veto is subject to the cabinet's advice, it is unlikely that the president could use this veto against a government bill except in the circumstances mentioned earlier. In second point, Durgadas Basu points out that the only instance of the exercise of the president's veto power over a bill passed by parliament so far has been in regard to the PAPSU appropriation bill. The bill was passed by Parliament when a proclamation under Article 356 was in operation in PEPSU. However, when the bill was presented to the President, the proclamation under Article 356 had been revoked. The President, Dr. Rajendra Prasad, withheld his assent on the ground that at the time the bill was presented for his assent, Parliament had no power to legislate for the PEPSU state. Then in 1991, the salaries, allowances, and pension of members of Parliament amendment bill was passed by Parliament without having first obtained the President's recommendation as required by Article 117. President Venkatraman did not assent to the bill. Now let's check about suspensive veto. The Indian President can remit the entire bill or any part of it for reconsideration of the Parliament with or without recommendations for amendments. That is in Article 111. If the Parliament again passes the bill with or without the amendments suggested by the President, by ordinary majority, it is obligatory for the President to give his assent. Whether in US, a bill sent back in this way requires to be passed by a higher majority. However, this type of veto is not available in the case of money bills. Uh, that is in Article 110. Money bills may be rejected by the President outright. But this is unlikely as, after all, money bills are introduced in the Parliament only with the previous sanction of the President. Now comes the pocket veto. The pocket veto available to the Indian President has more scope than that available to his American counterpart. This made a constitutional expert clip that the Indian President's pocket is bigger than the American President's, while the time frame fixed for US President to return a bill submitted for assent is only 10 days. No time limit is fixed for the Indian President. Article 111 of the Indian Constitution provides that the President may, as soon as possible after the presentation to him of a bill for assent, return the bill. Thus, the President of India can exercise this type of veto by simply ignoring the bill for an indefinite period of time. In 1986, for instance, President Jail Singh exercised pocket veto in the case of Indian Post Office Amendment Bill, passed under the Prime Ministership of Rajiv Gandhi. The bill was widely criticized as curtailing the freedom of press. The bill was ignored till the next president, R. Venkatraman, sent it back to reconsideration. By then, a new government had assumed power and the bill was withdrawn. Now, veto power vis-a-vis constitutional amendment bills. Unlike in the USA, constitutional amendment bills in India require presidential assent. The provision for which is provided in Article 368(2). However, it is obligatory for the President to give his assent to constitutional amendment bills. This obligation was inserted through the 24th Amendment Act, 1971, in clause 2 of the Article 368, which uses the word shall. The President shall give his assent to the bill and thereupon the Constitution shall stand amended. But before the 1971 amendment, Article 368(2) stated that it shall be presented to the President for his assent, and upon such assent being given to the bill, the Constitution shall stand amended. Thus, the 24th Amendment Act gave a special position to amendments, which cannot be questioned by the president or in any court of law. Thou the courts enjoy the power of a judicial review in case any amendment violates the basic features of the constitution as laid down by the Keshwanand Bharti case of 1973 and the Minerva Mills case 1980.